Bill Gaither sat in front of the camera in 2019, took a measured breath, and began to speak about Guy Penrod in a way that caught even long-time followers off guard. It wasn't an apology, and it wasn't quite a tribute either. It felt heavier than that, more complicated. He described the situation as one of the hardest decisions he had made in more than 5 decades of ministry. And then, almost as if the weight of it settled back onto him, he paused. That silence said as much as anything else. For those outside the Southern gospel world, it's hard to grasp just how significant that moment was. Guy Penrod wasn't merely another member of the Gaither Vocal Band. For many listeners, he was the defining voice, the deep, commanding presence that could carry a song across a packed arena without effort. His image was front and center on albums that sold in massive numbers, and for well over a decade, his voice became inseparable from the group's identity. From the mid-1990s through 2008, if someone listened to the Gaither Vocal Band, they were, in a very real sense, listening to Guy Penrod. He wasn't just part of the sound, he anchored it. That's why his departure in 2008 felt so abrupt and confusing. There was no scandal, no dramatic public disagreement, no visible fracture. Instead, there was a calm announcement, a polite statement, and a quiet exit that left fans trying to read between the lines. Publicly, everything appeared cordial. Privately, it was far more complicated, though it would take years for that complexity to fully surface. To understand what happened, it helps to understand Bill Gaither himself. He didn't just lead a music group, he built an entire ecosystem around it. His work expanded into homecoming videos, large-scale tours, and a business model that turned gospel music into something financially sustainable at a time when many believed that wasn't possible. His concerts filled massive venues, even in places other acts might overlook. Over time, he created something that functioned almost like an empire, one built not on corporate towers, but on consistency, branding, and careful oversight. Every part of it mattered, and every piece had a role to play. When Guy Penrod joined the group in 1994, he was still relatively unknown outside certain professional circles. He had talent, drive, and a distinctive voice, but he hadn't yet reached a wide audience. Bill Gaither recognized something in him early on. Within a short period, that potential turned into prominence. Guy became the standout figure in the group, and his voice started to define the sound audiences expected. Albums succeeded, tours sold out, and his presence became a central part of the brand. But that success introduced an unexpected tension. The Gaither Vocal Band had always been presented as a collective effort, a blend of voices without hierarchy. That idea worked well in theory, but reality began to shift the balance. Audiences started focusing on Guy in a way that disrupted that original concept. Fan mail tilted heavily in his direction. Promoters began asking specifically whether he would be part of upcoming tours. Merchandise featuring him sold significantly more than anything else. Gradually, it became clear that while the group remained intact, one individual had become its focal point. That shift created a challenge for a system designed around consistency and interchangeability. The structure depended on the idea that members could come and go without fundamentally altering the identity of the group. Guy's growing influence made that idea harder to maintain. He wasn't easily replaceable, and that reality began to press against the boundaries of how the organization functioned. Over time, differences began to emerge, not in a loud or confrontational way, but in quieter, more gradual forms. Guy wanted to expand his role. He wanted more creative input, opportunities to write and produce, and a share of the success that reflected his growing importance to the group's appeal. These weren't unreasonable requests from his perspective, but they didn't align with the established structure. The response he received wasn't a dramatic refusal, but rather a series of decisions that reinforced the existing boundaries. The message became clear. The framework would remain as it was. That left Guy with a difficult choice. He could stay and continue working within limits that no longer matched his ambitions, or he could leave and try to build something on his own without the support system he had relied on for years. Neither option was easy. Staying meant sacrificing creative freedom and potentially financial growth. Leaving meant stepping away from a highly successful platform and starting over in many ways. In 2008, he chose to leave. The explanation given publicly focused on family and a desire to pursue solo ministry. Both of those reasons were genuine, but they didn't tell the full story. Behind them was the reality of a decision shaped by constraints that couldn't be resolved within the existing structure. Bill Gaither, reflecting years later, acknowledged that the situation had effectively forced that choice. It wasn't about conflict as much as incompatibility between what the system allowed and what one of its key figures needed. What makes this situation more nuanced is that Bill Gaither was not acting out of malice. By most accounts, he has been generous, supportive, and committed to his work in ways that go beyond business considerations. At the same time, he was responsible for maintaining something he had spent decades building. That responsibility came with decisions that prioritized stability and control, even when those decisions had personal costs. The impact of Guy's departure was noticeable. Attendance numbers declined, album sales dropped, and while the group continued, it did so with a different dynamic. New members brought talent and professionalism, but the particular combination of voice and presence that Guy offered proved difficult to replicate. The organization adapted as it was designed to do, but the shift was evident. Years later, when asked whether he would have handled things differently, Bill Gaither gave an answer that stood out for its directness. He said that Guy needed to leave for his own reasons, and that accommodating those needs would have required changes that might have undermined the structure he had built. Letting him go, while painful, was the decision he believed was necessary. Guy's solo career developed steadily. Though it didn't reach the same level of commercial visibility he had experienced before, some interpreted that as a sign that leaving had been a miscalculation. Others, particularly those closer to him, saw it differently. They described a sense of fulfillment and authenticity that came from having greater control over his work. When asked about it years later, he expressed a sentiment that captured the complexity of the situation. He regretted that it had to come down to a choice at all. The broader significance of this story extends beyond the individuals involved. It highlights the tension between creative expression and organizational structure, even in environments framed around shared purpose and values. It shows how success can create pressures that challenge the very systems that enabled it. It also reveals how decisions that make sense from one perspective can carry costs in another. In the years since, both men have continued on their respective paths. They have shared stages occasionally, maintaining a level of mutual respect, But the dynamic has changed. What once was a close working relationship has become something more distant, shaped by the choices each made. The organization continues evolving as it always has, while Guy's independent path reflects the priorities that led him to leave. There is no simple resolution to this story, no clear conclusion that frames one side as entirely right or the other as entirely wrong. Instead, it remains an example of how complex decisions unfold when individual growth meets established systems. It leaves open the question of whether things could have turned out differently under other circumstances, or whether the outcome was, in some way, inevitable.